or video rights here, but we welcome you to ILOC 2025. My name is Mary Ann Morey. I'm the district consultant with Central District with the State Library of Iowa. With me today is my colleague, Amanda Grom, who is the Library Resources Technician for Northwest and Southwest districts with the State Library of Iowa. And welcome, welcome. We are so excited about ILOC. This is our annual all-day, all-online conference. Just as a reminder, you may be seeing some closed captioning that is auto-generated. You can use the CC button on the bottom, probably located at the bottom of your screen, of your Zoom screen, to turn that on or off as you so desire. So I think that's about all I needed to say. I'm going to get us started here with our webinar today. Our session this morning is about reducing barriers, a roadmap to making your library accessible. So in today's session, you're going to learn how to self-assess the current physical and mental accessibility of your library, solicit feedback from community partners, and implement solutions to reducing barriers on a budget, I might add. That's always a good thing. Our presenters today are both from the West Des Moines Public Library here in Iowa. With us are Kate Thompson, who is reference librarian there, and Susan Greenwood, who is the executive assistant to the director at West Des Moines Library. I just want to note that Kate was a contributor to the book Library Programming for Autistic Children and Teens, which is an ALA book published in 2021. And I love that Susan says in her bio she was the chaos coordinator for the West Des Moines Library's recent renovation. And Susan, I think that during that renovation, your library did make some positive changes to accessibility at your library, which I'm sure you'll be sharing with us. So I'm going to turn things over to the two of you.
Welcome, everybody. It's great to see where everybody is logging in from. That's a lot of fun. We're going to share with you today the process that we developed for evaluating and increasing accessibility at our library, and then provide a roadmap for you to do the same. We will be using the chat quite a bit, so please don't be shy about putting questions in. We'll ask you, Marianne, to just sort of keep an eye on it. So at the end, we hope we can have a good, robust discussion. We may not be able to follow your questions as we go, but we've got some time built in, so please.
Yes, I will. I meant to mention that
Wonderful.
earlier. I will be keeping an eye on the chat, so please put your questions and relevant comments there, and I will ask those questions at appropriate times, which might be at the very end of the presentation.
Okay.
And we do have in our slides a QR code, but I did drop a link in the chat first thing that has a link to all of our handouts and samples and slides. So just housekeeping note, that's where that's located.
You want to go ahead and open those up? That's great. Don't get overwhelmed. We'll explain everything. We've included quite a bit of documentation because we really want to be able to set you on your way at the end of this presentation. So as Marianne said, I'm Kate and this is Susan. We're from West Des Moines. We were both members of a staff committee that was formed to assess and improve the library experience for everyone. It was a volunteer committee, and I was drawn to it because I'm a neurodivergence advocate. My two sons are autistic and have ADHD, and through working with their schools, I had gotten involved in community advocacy and that expanded to the local and state level. I'm interested in improving the user experience for patrons and staff, and I sometimes speak to groups on topics such as neurodiversity and human resources. So the accessibility committee seemed like a natural fit where I could learn more about access and disability generally.
And I'm Susan. My background is in public service, working with directors of various city departments rather than libraries specifically. But when I joined the West Des Moines Library, like Marianne said, I stumbled into this project manager role involving our renovation of our building. So when this committee was forming, I felt like I had a really deep-rooted understanding of our building and its transformation. But I also felt like I had a knowledge of city policy, which would give me insight into change management and challenges with change. So I felt like that was my role to play. My everyday role here at the library is just to get our staff what they need to do their jobs well. So I'm not a librarian, but I want our staff to be able to serve our patrons well, and I also oversee the budget. So I thought that would be a helpful part for me to be involved in. I'm also interested as a woman with a disability. I have type 1 diabetes. My husband is a disabled veteran, and my toddler is on the path to a neurodivergence diagnosis as well. Our group had 4 other members besides Kate and I, and everyone had unique perspectives. And at our first meeting, we sat around the table in this very room, talking about our experiences, and we didn't really know where we were headed as a group, but we were a very diverse and excited group, and we just had to figure out what it was we were hoping to achieve.
So this is the marching orders that we had been given, basically to evaluate what was already happening at the library and then give some feedback to the administration and leadership about different ways that we could make the library more accessible, not just physically, but also emotionally, mentally, and then of course within the limits of our budget. So we came together because the administration had asked for volunteers, and as we said, a fun fact is Susan and I are total backseat drivers. Neither of us are the library director. And in fact, I'm only a part-time employee. So we just wanted to mention that to assure you that no matter the size of your library, what we're going to suggest is doable even for libraries with small staff, and even if you aren't administrators. Our group was 1 representative from each division. We reported to our peers and to the library director. And the primary job was to give feedback and suggestions. But one thing we discovered as we went through is there's so many things that were just easy for us to go ahead and accomplish. So we asked for permission to do that. And of course, the administration was pleased for us to just tackle some of that, the low-hanging fruit. Now that might look different from your library. In a small library, you might be that primary stakeholder and you can just act on the ideas right away. So that brings us to, how do you decide what to tackle first? When we started thinking about that, we realized first we needed to do some thinking about what accessibility actually entails.
So we thought it might be fun as a part of our session today to kind of recreate that brainstorming. So what we're going to ask you to do is put some terms or ideas in the chat that are things that you associate with the word accessibility. And then we'll discuss those results. So we'll give you just a minute or two to put that in. And I'll see if I can figure out how to read the chat. Here we go. So yeah, we're going to take this little road trip together today, and we just want to know kind of what comes to mind first for you when you hear the word accessibility.
Somebody put in the chat, clear path, inclusion, no barriers, inclusivity.
Lots of measuring my sidewalks for accreditation, right? So
get out there with your tape measure.
Getting that data.
Large print and braille, I love that.
Easy access, both to the building and material.
Unlimited access options. Easy access. Yep, shelf distance, ADA compliance.
Unlimited access makes me think of, Zoom book clubs and other things that we're doing outside the building.
Access to all. Yep. Bingo, join our team.
Yes. Want you on the team. Access to everyone, even the patrons that we haven't met yet that aren't using the library yet. Online access of databases. Hearing impairment.
Oh, we have a large.
I recently saw a notice about a webinar that was dealing with sound considerations in the library as an accessibility issue, which I found extremely interesting.
That was something that came up for us, was the idea of signage to give more clues as to where certain levels of noise were appropriate.
And we can get into it more too, but we also have a white noise system to help with that, kind of like the ambient noise.
You mentioned signage. That is definitely another aspect or consideration of accessibility.
Oh, I love the idea of including not just safety, but comfort for all. That's a good one from Allie.
Yeah. Yeah, does it feel welcoming, not just accessible?
Yeah.
Is it easy? Well, this is great. And I see a lot of physical and building related terms, wheelchairs and ramps and sidewalks. And of course, those facility items are great, and ADA should always be at the top of your list. That's always what you're going to want to tackle first and make sure that you have all of that covered.
And as you can see on our paperwork or on our slide here, ADA is at the top of our list. That's the roadmap theme that we're using today, and how we provide access is going to look different based on all of your own size of your library, your budget, and your community. What makes up your community? I see some people talking about like the specific needs of their own community. And what we want to do is talk about practical tools that you can scale and adjust to your specific needs. And the chat demonstrated just how broad that can be. When we include ADA accommodations within accessibility, we know that that's like the bare minimum of, but what we want to challenge you to include today is outside that box. Thinking about the areas that we have on the screen here. This is what we got to after our first meeting, and this is how we grouped things, and it was just the start of our conversations. And it might seem overwhelming, but I guarantee that there are things that you are doing to serve all of these populations, even if you don't think about it in that way. We wanted to focus on serving all potential patrons, and we also want to serve our staff well, including the people that we aren't reaching in the way that is comfortable or accessible for them. So let's talk first about the types of accessibility. So permanent accessibility, maybe somebody who is without a limb and only has one arm. Temporary accessibility, maybe someone who has one of their arms in a cast. And then situational accessibility, maybe that's a new parent holding a newborn who doesn't have full use of their arms. So when we're talking about accessibility, it can be that whole range from situational to permanent. Then we talk about each of these sections. So for ADA, like we said, door buttons, ramps, general. Do you do things like offering curbside service? That's serving someone who's sick, someone who has mobility issues, someone who is immunocompromised, something like that. Then we talk about language, speech, nonverbal patrons. Something as simple as using Google Translate to communicate. Have you had to do that? Have you made a procedure for having to do that? If someone is deaf or hard of hearing, they couldn't hear you, could you use paper and pen to communicate with them, just to be able to provide that experience for them? When we talk about neurodivergence, do you have sensory headphones or other accommodations to make your ongoing programming accessible for patrons who have those needs? Mental illness and emotional, that's one that we wanted to focus on for our staff side, and having support and training, mental health reviews for our behavior policy that would support our staff and support patrons who might be having those same issues. When we talk about gender identity and gender orientation, do you use pronouns on your emails? Are you welcoming of those things? Economic, lack of caregiver support, maybe based on age, level of education, people who are housing insecure. For those things, are you able to make cards remotely, make cards at school with parent permission? Do your policies support or limit access for any of those groups? For visual, do you use high readability font and good contrast in your marketing? And race, ethnicity, culture, do you use local photos in your marketing to represent your community? So that just gives a little overview of where we're headed today.
And as we think about all those things, if you do have them, how are you marketing them? And are you announcing that these things are available for the programs? So at our library, we noticed as we had these discussions that we had a lot of the same issues and ideas coming up. Before we kind of settled on Google Translate, there was another program that we hadn't fully been trained on, that we weren't sure if it was available or not. We weren't sure how to access it. And we realized we kind of were losing institutional memory as staff came and go. So when we identified those focus areas on the previous page, we started keeping notes for each of those areas in a spreadsheet. And it looks kind of overwhelming here. But if you look in the documents, we've made you a much cleaner copy so you could start using that for yourself. We just wanted to show you how incredibly dense it is and how this just became the gathering place for all the information that we were finding. And while this has evolved over time, we're still using it today and we expect it to continue. This is our living document showing the progress, and it also helps with that memory problem as people come and go. The spreadsheet stands alone and it can be accessed by all staff. And as we gathered data and information from surveys and conversations, that information was added to the sheet. We're also continuing to expand our knowledge with readings, webinars, and research, especially at the start of our committee. That was a really heavy focus. So we were sharing out with each other what we had learned from the research, and this was a handy place to put our thoughts. So for example, I read something about gender neutral bathroom signage, and I could put that image right in the document so everyone could quickly see what I was talking about.
So just to kind of give you a little overview, the far left-hand side of the spreadsheet, the first column is those different areas. So from the last slide, we had a section for each of those, what we called focus areas. And then we identified in the next column the things that meet those needs that are already available. One big takeaway is that we offer so many things for our patrons, and sometimes even our staff aren't aware. And those could be considered accommodations or beneficial services for patrons. And those seem like things that we just needed to highlight and give more education to, both internally to staff and to the public. So an example of that is visually impaired patrons. Oftentimes, we are able to easily get them to our large print materials, our audiobooks, things like that. But some of our staff were not as familiar with the idea of suggesting interlibrary loan for them to be able to access materials, or the fact that we have a screen enlarging machine, or that we have digital offerings. So just thinking about what we could provide more education for our staff and then for the patrons as well. The next column was identifying things that had already been looked into, but that weren't currently possible. So those are things that we have to give a consistent explanation for as staff. An example of that is that about every 6 months, somebody suggests that we get up a drive-up book return, which
That'd be great.
We'd love to have that. But the building wasn't designed that way, and there isn't a place in the building or on the exterior of the building that's currently code compliant to put in a return, even if we want to. So that's a great idea. But when we would have staff being asked that question, if they just ask someone at the desk, they didn't always know that there was a historical explanation for why that isn't the case. So having that cataloged in an informational way so that staff could access that and give the same explanation instead of saying, oh, that's a great idea, like let me pass that on. And then to come to find out nothing ever happens with it. If you can give that consistent explanation right away, that's really pleasing to people. So
it's even a great opportunity to say, oh, we actually have a kiosk in another part of our city that you can use, and other upcoming, the things that we have thought about.
Right. The next column is what we called oh, that's a great idea. Those are things that we are working on or want to work on, but that hadn't come up and we hadn't looked into them, but that maybe would require a bit of future research or work. So it's our to-do list. An example of that is that the city has language in the footer of all of our agendas that said something like,
those interested in participating but who need accommodation must contact so-and-so no less than 48 hours ahead.
Like, why are we doing that? That is limiting. We want to revise the wording to be more friendly and more general. So we changed it through this committee to say,
if you have specific accessibility or accommodation questions, email library at or call this number.
What we wanted to do was to reduce the stigma and the barrier associated with someone needing to ask for accommodations. Like if we can provide that accommodation at this very minute, we will. If maybe that's like headphones, like someone needs headphones or sensory blocking, and we have that, we're going to provide that to you. If we can provide it later, we will. Like say someone reached out to us and wanted to come to a program, they were visiting town, but they would need a sign language interpreter. We would look into that. We'd be happy to see if that's a possibility. Or if it's something that we can't provide, we want to be able to tell you why. One of the things that came up for us was adult changing stations, which is something that our building can't accommodate currently. And we want to be able to just tell them that. And the last column is our resources and links. So those are things like Kate said, when we want to put in an image or we want to link to a training, also organizations, things that we didn't want to lose track of. So we're keeping that all in one place.
So anytime you go on a road trip, there is a difference between your expectations and your reality. And we certainly learned a lot on this journey. One thing was that it was a much more complex journey than we anticipated. One expectation was this would just be an in-house library project, but then the reality was that we gave presentations to the administrative team and then to the city staff. Some of the ideas could be implemented across other areas of city departments. So like the meeting footer language that we mentioned, we suggested that our city departments be as inclusive as we were trying to be, and we worked with our DEI coordinator on that. Another expectations was that we could just send info to staff one time, explain to them everything we needed to know. And the reality was there is so much, and there's constantly new people and subs, and we needed a place that was easily accessible and that we could continue to edit, that would be ongoing. So we created a resource webpage for staff and the public. And that is where that finalized information, the things that we actually have available, lives, as well as a few facts. And then and the link to that is also in your handout. And eventually we moved all of the spreadsheets currently available and previously investigated items to that website. So now we're left with just tracking those in progress or to investigate items and the resources for each area.
Those come up all the time. I just added one to it the other day that our next meeting we'll have to talk about. So another expectation is that our staff know everything that we offer and provide. And the reality is that staff are busy, staff are focused on their individual day-to-day tasks, and that we really did need to increase the staff education component. It was a critical part so that we presented to our own staff at our library's in-service day. And then with the website up, we wanted staff to be empowered with that information, to be able to refer to it, ask questions, and then also refer people to us if they didn't know the answer. So our team became kind of a fielding point for those type of questions as well. For some things, patrons just want an explanation of why things are the way that they are, even if the answer is no, and to know that we're always working to improve. Another expectation is that this would be a short-term work group, and the reality is that we're still meeting.
2 years later.
2 years later, every month we meet. So there are a number of future projects that came out of this original group, but we're excited about the partnerships that we formed, and now we're talking about how that team continues on and transitions and involves other members of our staff and community as well. So let's transition a little bit to talk about how you guys can steal this process to meet the needs of your own community. But first we want, what did that first slide say about testing the limits? Test the limits of our love. So I don't know if you still love us or not, but we're feeling overwhelmed. We've thrown a lot of information at you. So we want to take a pause in the middle and see if anybody has questions about our process before we move on to how it can transition to your own libraries. Oh,
good.
Marianne.
I haven't seen any questions come in, but I just wanted to clarify, and you said this up front at the very beginning of your presentation. If you're in a smaller library, I know Susan and Kate keep talking about we communicated with staff. For you in a smaller library, that might mean we communicated with our trustees. So and even if you're in a larger library, I would think you want to communicate this to your board as well. So just keep that in mind, that communication with the key people at your library, whether that's staff or trustees or perhaps both.
You've done this data collection, then when you want to make the argument for the new ramp or whatever your top priority project is, you have that information in hand.
And I think that institutional knowledge too, I think about in a smaller library, like when you're not there, the next person, like how frustrating would it be to see someone asking the question, doing your job after you, when you know you spent all this time doing it. So if you have something that you're providing that will live beyond you, or in our case, like if our team transitions and we're not there anymore, at least they have the information to work from.
That's a great point. Yeah, leaving a good path that others can follow.
Yep, leaving a legacy of sorts. Okay,
I don't see any questions.
so we'll move on. We'll see if this next part triggers some thoughts.
So we wanted to get a feel for who we have in the group today. So we're going to ask you to go ahead and use the chat. And we wanted to find out what your community population is that you're serving.
Oh, is that 220?
10,000, so 2,000.
Around 9,500.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love the ones where you guys have your name already in there. 5,100.
Great, a great range.
Really great
Big
range.
range, like looks like it's from around 200 to 10,000.
Council Bluffs.
Council
Oh,
Bluffs here, that's
45,000. There you go.
60,000. Urbandale, yep, okay.
Okay, so I'm just seeing
Yeah.
just a handful that are over
Larger, but
yeah, that are over 20,000. And then we wanted to ask if any of you are a county seat or if you're close to a metro area. You can just do a yes or no for that. Okay.
oh, there's some no's. Those of you that are no's, we'll work on that at the end here, or we'll touch base. We just want to be able to make sure that some of those smaller communities that might feel like distant from those resources have ways to be able to transition or partner or find those things that might need.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Because there are some partners that you can find being a county seat or even being near like the area hospital or the casino. So you've got different partners that we may not have considered. And then I'm going to take a stab that there aren't a ton of directors here, but go ahead and tell us yes or no if you are the library director.
Oh, I saw a couple.
All right.
That's a good
Yes,
mix
yes,
too.
Yes, yes.
Because
All caps, no. Okay.
no,
That's how I am too.
No, thank you.
No, thank you.
I think the point we want to make with that is that those of you that are directors, it might be easier for you to implement these things quickly, but those of you that aren't directors can have the same impact and can help start those conversations.
And as Marianne pointed out, you might go ahead and be making those changes, but then reporting back to your board or foundation rather than needing to ask permission.
And those of you that are directors who have staff, if it seems like something that you really want to start gathering that feedback of what they're experiencing, what your staff are experiencing too. All right, the last one, maybe just raise your hand or put in the chat if you really don't want to go on this road trip anymore. If you've had enough of us and maybe you're high maintenance and you just take direct flights to private beach houses. I mean, if you do, oh, just kidding. We're all library professionals here. That's not happening. Well, jokes aside, we want to review with you what you offer, see about getting feedback, and then implement change to serve your patrons. So let's go.
So before you go on a road trip, it's always good to prepare yourself by making sure your car is in order. This is where we kick the tires before we head out. So we need to do that honestly with your library building and your amenities. And I think we already saw in the chat that that's something that is top of mind for a lot of people. But one thing we'd ask you to do is put yourself in the position of others rather than doing your usual routine around the building. Walk around as though you were a patron and think about things that would be hard for someone with abilities that are different from your own. And then look at the services and programs that you offer. Are there ways you can pivot a program to be more inclusive or appeal to additional groups of people? Do a complete review of your online presence. Is there outdated or incomplete information? I know the state library has webinars about online accessibility. You want to think about fonts and whether patrons are using screen reading software. And then there's also the idea of learning about community asset mapping. So you can, a lot of you already have, so you have that information to help you identify your local partners. And then you want to stock benchmark libraries to get ideas. And as I saw a bunch of libraries that were in the like 1800 category, I thought, well, these are people that could connect with each other.
Right.
But that means looking at libraries of the same size, but also with a similar makeup. So the person who said they have a lot of 65 and over, and the person who, so there were a lot of hearing impaired folks. Those are libraries that you want to connect with. And you also want to look at what they're offering in terms of their building and their services and their online presence. What are they doing? So what we did was we actually asked a part-time employee to check websites of benchmark libraries. And we were lucky that they had already been identified for us in our strategic plan. We had already connected with those libraries that we knew were similar to our makeup, but it's something that's pretty easy for you to identify as well. And then, of course, keep all the data in a shared space as you gather it.
The next step is just to start asking questions. So don't assume that you know everything about everyone. You have to dig into what people actually need and what they actually want. So we did that with surveys, and I would ask you that you consider using a survey that allows you to analyze that data electronically. It is a time saver. So we've given you in the handouts and in the links our actual surveys. So if you want to steal that, that's a starter right there. We started by asking our staff first about their experiences, what questions arise, what roadblocks they see people bumping up against. And then that was all really good information. There were some things in there that were tempting to like jump right on that seemed like low-hanging fruit, but we kind of pulled ourselves back a little bit and said, we need to validate that information because we don't want to assume that when we see someone having an issue that they need our help. So the next thing was to find those community partners. So we identified and surveyed over 50 community partners. We found those partners by looking at each focus area and researching organizations who serve those groups. The more local that we could get those connections, the better. We scoured websites. We found contact information and cold called. We utilized contacts we already had. And sometimes that just meant knowing a patron or a staff member who had a connection to a group or had a unique perspective or a need that was unmet.
For example, a patron who with vision impairment that likes to use our very antiquated screen reading machine. So we said, hey, could you help us take a look at this and think through it with us?
So we sent those 50 community partners our survey. We asked them to be secret shoppers. We asked them to actually come into the building and interact with our staff and explore our space with the vision and in mind of the constituents that they serve. And then we asked them to also visit our website and share their raw experiences with us.
So after you send out this type of survey, we want you to be emotionally prepared to hear some honest feedback that might not be what you anticipated. Feedback from community partners might mirror what your staff says, but we also found out that sometimes it didn't. Particularly when you're receiving feedback from folks who have not yet used your library. We sometimes found it frustrating when a survey said, I wish you had X service, and we do. We have it. We've had it for years.
That's on us.
Take a deep breath. It's frustrating, but those types of comments are really helpful. They're going to help you identify the gaps in your marketing, in the awareness of your patrons, even the awareness of your staff. And there are opportunities for you to shout your good work. And now you know that you can broadcast that.
And I think hearing that from community partners is somehow slightly better than hearing it from like a community survey.
Yes.
Where it's like more anonymous and that can be extra frustrating. But hearing it from a community partner, you felt like you were going into this process like asking for help, and you felt like you were asking somebody who could give you like honest, specific feedback.
Right. So, and then we could say, how could we get the word out to your people better?
Yeah.
And then all this feedback got sorted into the spreadsheet, and we worked to prioritize our goals. I saw that someone had written that is just so overwhelming because there's so many things you'd like to do. And that's absolutely true. Not everything's going to be possible, but our goal was to reduce unnecessary barriers. And that kind of helped us to have that mantra. So although now I really like comfortable too. Now that's on my mind. But when we thought back to, okay, how do we reduce the barriers? And then we were able to get our top priorities to the top of the list. So hopefully that will make you feel a little bit less overwhelmed, because when you see feedback over and over that, oh, this one thing is really an issue, it's going to help you focus in. So now we're going to talk about partners. Who can you think of in your community who would provide a new perspective, or who you already work with or you would like to? So in our handout, we provided our generalized list of our 50 plus organizations.
I think we just want to know kind of if you guys have unique groups that you work with that could maybe spark something for another library, or those of you that have specific needs in your community, if you kind of already identified organizations that could be helpful. So we'll just see if some people pop into the chat with some
You've already mentioned
organizations.
some. Yeah, or even a particular patron that you are helping to serve.
I know somebody had mentioned that they had that 65 plus group, and we had talked about like county hospitals or health centers can be good resources for like dementia care or working with, older residents. A lot of the county organizations, county public health, those can be good partners.
Becoming a dementia-friendly library.
Keep those coming in the chat if you guys think of organizations that you want to share that you work with. We'll just switch over here.
So speaking of reducing those barriers, once you share it with your administration, all you've learned, and they have given you the approval, or once you've just decided you know what you want to do, it's time to implement and publicize what you found out. You might need to improve awareness of your offerings through staff and patron education. What does your library offer, and how are you providing that information to your community? For example, during the process, you may have gotten in contact with an Alzheimer's support group and realized that caregivers aren't aware of how the library can serve them. So now you've made that connection where maybe you could visit their next meeting and share out what the library has.
And there will be short and long-term goals that come to the surface. Some of the projects you can take care of easily, others will take time and resources. I think our biggest success was having this tracking point to keep all of that information together. If you have things that come up, you have a volunteer or a staff person who has some extra time, then you know what they should focus on, what they can work on. By also keeping track of the connections, you're able to make contacts and form those partnerships to have someone to reach out to when you have an idea for a program or want to reach a specific group of people. In the end, what we thought would be an ongoing project or short-term task force became an ongoing project. And it's a standing committee now with work that still is yet to be done. We did want to share one of our small successes. So one of the things that came up was that people liked the Culture City bags. And I think some places offer those, like the zoo. They're a way for patrons to have some resources to interact with a space or a location without having specific programming. So they had like sensory headphones, a couple of fidgets, and you could buy them through this Culture City organization with their own branding and their own information. And we just thought we could do that. Like we could do that ourselves. So we ended up formulating our own bag and contents, and our staff curated those. So we were going to share that with you today. So we just went on Amazon and had like a little logo put on a bag that says Sensory Stack, and it has our logo. And then we kind of curated what we wanted to put in the bag ourselves. So we've got like a little tangle,
Even my favorites, wooden
things. We have a pair of sensory headphones, a water bead, like sensory timer, a couple of fidget stones, a couple of fidget spinner poppers, a popper ball. And so these are things that we kind of vetted as staff that would be, washable, safe. If somebody were to put it in their mouth, there's no small parts.
In fact, we had one that failed. We played with them for a while. This guy was too squishy and his eyes started rubbing off. So it was kind of nice for us. Instead of just buying a pre-made thing, we got to pick out what we were.
Yes. And so then the plan is that we will be, yes, the headphones can be reused. So they're like nice, wipeable, one piece. The idea is that these will be in our programming rooms and at our service desks. And we're actually going to debut them at the Sensory Spaces, which is a Metro initiative that we have coming up at the end of February. So we'll let people coming in for that Sensory Spaces program know that these are available. They'll also be pretty visually obvious in our programming room. So while we don't offer all the time a sensory friendly like story time. We do on that one particular day, but generally we don't have a specific regular story time and a sensory story time. But what we do have then are these bags that can provide a sensory experience for someone at our normal everyday story times that we do offer.
And we also have a help room where people can go if they need a break, if they're feeling overwhelmed. So one easy piece for us was suggesting to all of our programming folks that they make sure to remind people of that at the start of a program. So just getting our administration on board with that to say, hey, if you need to take a break, we have this room available to you. So that's a little piece of the education. And those bags we're also going to use for checkout. So that's another way that, say, somebody who is immunocompromised or isn't able to come into the library, they could put those on hold, and they'd still be able to use them at home.
I think we're excited to get feedback on those and knowing that we can make adjustments as we go, but they were about $50 a piece to make those. So
we were thinking that would be a great thing. If you had, say, some grant money coming to you, that would be something that you could put on your list. All right. Well, as Douglas Adams said, I may not have gone where I intended to go. We certainly didn't, but I think I have ended up where I needed to be. So we have figured out where we needed to be now that we have our ongoing committee, which changed from a task force to an ongoing interdepartmental effort, and our spreadsheet that tracks everything we've collected. So we found this to be an organic, evolving process that took us surprising places. Whatever road you take in your journey, we hope you end up with some new ideas on how you can improve accessibility at your library. And we'd be happy to answer questions about how to implement the process. So when you're getting down to the nitty-gritty of it, we'd both be happy to work with you on that. Just get in touch with us. So now we have just under 10 minutes. We have time to dig in on some questions, and we will.
I was just
take a look at the chat.
peeking back through the chat now just
I
to
didn't
kind
think
of
we
see.
had a lot of questions, but we did have some good comments from people talking about some of their partners. And I really want to point out that, especially if you're in a small rural library, you can partner beyond your own small rural town and look at your county. What resources do you have in your county? And I saw that I think Chris mentioned about the extension office and the county public health office. Janelle mentioned a local physical therapy practice that's coming to their building, doing a walkthrough to advise about assistive products.
Oh, that's great.
Patrons who
That is
might
perfect.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really a fantastic partner in this process here.
Well, Mary asked how many of the bags we have. So we made enough bags to do one at each of our service desks. So we've got a children's desk, a teen desk, and an adult desk. And then we've got like a little story room for our little tiny kiddos and a larger community room. And then we did one extra for checkout. So how many was that? 1, 2, 3.
10.
Yeah. Yep. So
I'm going to ask a question I had about those bags. You said that attendees at like a story time, a regular story time, can use one of the bags as an assistive process for them. Do you have trouble with the other kids at story time who maybe don't really need one of those bags saying, I want those fidget toys too?
We'll find out. We're about to implement it.
Okay.
And I think that there is enough in the bag so that, especially at the like small to medium sized programs, I think it would be easy for everybody to grab something and throw them back in at the end. But they're going to be just hanging on a hook inside the door where they can be kind of self-serve. But we're going to have some information that will hang off of them with a QR code for more information. And then we know we're going to have to go back and check them routinely and see if things have disappeared or if they,
That was part of our budgeting too, was to have extras to replace things that go walkabout.
We did have a question just come in asking about successful ways to support non-English speakers in your community.
That's a good question. A lot of the actual like conversation circles or English as a second language groups for us go through the school district. So they end up having their conversation circles here at the library, but we let them host those programs. We have had one thing that comes up a lot as like the notary for the library is people who come in and need documents notarized. And I've used Google Translate almost extensively. I found that the city had a system that we, like Kate had mentioned, that we were able to use. It just wasn't user friendly. You had to call in and wait for an interpreter. And I hate to say that because it's just like a free app on your phone, but when I'm just trying to serve a patron and meet their needs and talk through something with them, my best bet is just to try to have that conversation back and forth with them through an app.
Working at the desk, sometimes people's receptive language is stronger than their spoken language. So just old pen and paper can help too. I can, if they're having trouble understanding me, sometimes if I write something down or I have them write something down, that can help us.
I was just going to mention there are some interpretation tools available at a fairly nominal amount from places like Amazon that I have seen other libraries use when they have big patrons of people who speak multiple languages and English is not their first language. So there are lots of resources available to help with those interpretations of spoken language. Now, Ashton, you asked the question, if you're talking about getting your materials translated, like your flyers and your website and things like that, that's going to require a little bit more.
Kind of Ashton's question about looking for ways to support the community members that don't speak English. And I don't know if you have like a kind of like a specific group, if your community is made up of a specific group, but if you have like a grocery store or a place where those people, congregate, like if you have a Hispanic population and there's a Mexican grocery store, that's a great place to start. Go there, find the owners or the people who are managing that facility and have a conversation. That happened for us when our kiosk went into Valley Junction. One of the things we wanted to do was have some Spanish language materials in that kiosk to serve the population who lives in that area. And our director at the time had gone to the local grocery store and just said, like, can you help us translate an information sheet to let people know that there's a kiosk and how they can get a library card. And so we kind of formed a little mini partnership that way to serve that group.
And another thing that was interesting was that we thought we knew maybe what languages we would want to translate into. And then we found out, fortunately, we had the information from our city that the top, 4 languages spoken in West Des Moines were not necessarily what we might have guessed. So that was another example of like really knowing who the people are that aren't in the building yet that you want to serve.
Our second step for that was to go to the school district and ask the school district, because they have all kinds of data that they have to pull for the state, just like we do. And one of those was like the most written languages at home and the spoken languages at home. And those two things weren't the same.
Right.
The top 4 of each of those. So
good information of ways to gather that kind of data.
Yeah, that's a great example of a community partner that keeps lots of data.
Yes, yeah.
We've got just a couple more minutes. Any additional questions for our presenters? And yes, I agree with comments coming in. This is a very great presentation. Thank you so much, Susan and Kate, for putting.
No, you're very welcome.
It felt like it was a process that went really well for us, and we wanted to share it with everybody else, but it was hard in making a presentation to say it was so just like getting into the work was just the biggest part of it.
Usually I present on things that are pretty abstract. So it's like, how much do we share? We hope we're not too overwhelming, and yet we've given you enough that you can get the ball rolling. So.
Yeah, even if it did seem overwhelming, I would suggest, like, please check out the handouts, the samples, because those are things that we hope that you don't recreate the wheel, steal it and make it your own. So
I'd love to know if there, if maybe if you tell us yes, if there are folks who think they will implement some part of this in your library.
And can you answer how long was your process from when you started talking with people to when you started? I'm not sure, because you said this is ongoing, but somebody's asking about the timeline.
But the actual assessment, we're 6 months, maybe?
Yeah, we're a full year and a half in now. So we started the program was started in January. We did the survey over the summer. So we designed the survey and sent it out over the summer, and then we had the results, and we're starting to work on those things by the fall. So I would say within the first year, we had gone from what the hell are we doing?
And then surveying the staff, which was our first step,
right,
which took a month or two. Yeah, and then we did have to do a little bit of nudging on the back end, because people are busy and we had asked them to both look at our website and the physical building. So we had a few people that just did one of those things. And so we had some reaching back out to folks.
Okay, thank you. This was wonderful. We really appreciate the efforts you've put into making your library accessible and especially the efforts you made into helping us understand how we can make our own libraries more accessible to our public. We are finished with this first morning breakout session. We next will have a noon keynote starting at noon, right at noon from 12 to 1. So feel free to bring your lunch and eat your lunch while you watch our noon keynote speaker, Jessica Hilburn, who will be talking about digging into data, where to find it, how to use it, and how to maximize your impact with it. And I will just briefly mention that CE credit will be given to you when you complete a form. Amanda, I think maybe you've got that link, posting it in the chat, but we can provide that to you. You will want to wait until you've attended all of the sessions you plan to attend in ILOC before you complete that form. And if this is your last one, then yes, you can go ahead and complete that form there. Amanda has just popped it into the chat. But again, if you're planning to join us all day long, we go until 3:40 this afternoon. Plus, we have our evening session that's especially designed for trustees, but equally valuable for all library staff. And that starts at 6 o'clock, runs for an hour this evening. So again, thank you, Susan and Kate. Thank you, Amanda, for producing. And thank you all for attending. And I hope to see you at